Welcome to Fruity Knitting. This is episode 94. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Andrea, and we're back again with a program full of fantastic guests for you, which we're excited about. So recently, as you know, we've come back from covering the 10th anniversary of Vogue Knitting Live in New York, which we showed you in the last episode. And while we were there, we had the opportunity of also interviewing Clara Parkes. So Clara Parkes is an American wool expert, yarn critic, and the author of 7 books, and she's been educating knitters on yarn for around 20 years now. In fact, years before Ravelry started, Clara's site, Knitters Review, was a forum where knitters could really research and discuss yarn. And Clara's also one of the first public personalities to really talk about the unique qualities and characteristics of breed-specific yarns. So her latest book, this one here, Vanishing Fleece, is about her journey to transform a 676-pound bale of fleece into yarn. And it's also the story of the vanishing American wool industry. So it's an interesting book, and our interview covers all of her experiences, well, not all of them, but a lot of her experiences in this book. So we think you'll really enjoy meeting Clara and also the interview.
Yep, we've also got 2 further vendor interviews that we recorded at Vogue Knitting Live, and we particularly wanted to include these in this episode because they really complement the interview with Clara Parkes. Yeah. First up, we're meeting Erin from Morehouse Farm, which is a Saxon Merino sheep farm in the Hudson River Valley. And then we're meeting Laura and Sven from Northlight Fibers on Block Island. Northlight Fibers is a micromill that produces luxury blends with minimal processing.
And we're staying in the very northeastern part of America with our guest Elizabeth Smith from Maine. Elizabeth's our guest on Knitters of the World. And of course, we have the usual updates on our own knitting projects. And I think for that, we're starting with you.
In under construction.
Yeah.
Our most recent knit along is the Tuck Stitches and Brioche Lace Cowl, and lots of people are jumping in with really interesting projects in the cowl, so yeah. That's really great. As you know, I've been working through Nancy Marchant's book on tuck stitches, just picking out stitch patterns to swatch up. Originally I thought I would just do a whole lot of swatches, but I have since decided to do an actual project, so I'll show you that in a minute. But first up, I'd like to show you my swatch and the patterns that I've been doing. Andrea has been good enough to wet block this, which is really good because you can see the stitch patterns better. Tuck stitches are a little bit like lace, where you don't necessarily see the stitches clearly until the fabric's been opened up with a good blocking. So there it is. My criteria for choosing which stitches to do was firstly that it looks good both on the right side and on the wrong side, and then preferably that it used the same amount of the light colour yarn and the dark colour yarn. So you can see that's where I am now, so I didn't do it every time. Nancy actually notes this in the description of the stitch pattern. So she'll say it uses equal amounts of light colour and dark colour, or it might say it uses twice as much light colour as dark colour, or even 3 times. That tends to be the options that you get.
Dolls, that's 100 grams and that was a 50-gram ball.
Oh, that's part of the explanation then.
Did you just think, what happened?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Because there is one that I've done which is not even. Anyway, it's easy to tell how much of the yarn you're going to use relatively because you just look at the stitch pattern and it says for each row light colour or dark colour. And if you've got the same number of light colour rows and dark colour rows, then you're going to use roughly the same amount of yarn. And you will see sometimes it says light, 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 dark, light, 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 dark, or something like that. So you're going to use 3 times as much of the light. So that's pretty straightforward. So here's a close-up picture of the front and the back of the swatch. The right side is on the left. That does make sense, doesn't it, Andrea?
Yeah.
And the wrong side of the fabric is on the right. So
the right side of the picture.
The right side of the picture, yeah. For those of you who have Nancy's book, I'll tell you the numbers of the pattern so that you can look them up as we go. The first one here is number 52. It's described as a broken rib fabric and it has a 6-row pattern. This pattern actually uses twice as much of the light coloured yarn as of the dark coloured. Even though it is an easy pattern to do, my pearls were a bit looser than my knit rows, so my swatch doesn't look that good. I do improve a little bit as I go. I think both sides of this pattern are really interesting and I do find the wrong side really good. The next one is number 49, which is a semi-ribbed fabric with a 4-row pattern using equal amounts of light colour and dark coloured yarn. Before Andrea blocked it, the ribbing really pulled the fabric in and now it's much more open, almost looks lacy. I really like the texture of this one. The wrong side is also really good with the columns of knit stitches that you can see there. The next one, number 31, looks very similar to the previous, but it's a stockinette fabric. So it's really flat and it's got a 4-row repeat. I like the right side pattern of this stitch better than the previous one, but it's not so reversible because the wrong side really does look like a wrong side. This one's number 24, again a stockinette, and it has a really interesting reverse side. I really like this one. And this next one, I'm not sure what number it is, I lost track, but it's very similar to number 31 that we saw earlier, but kind of smaller. And the last one here is number 36. This one's interesting. It's a stockinette fabric, but it's actually completely reversible. So the wrong side is actually like an inverse of the right side. So I think my favorite pattern is number 49, which is this one here. And I really like it because it's got the texture in it. So the little rib part of it sort of opens it up here, and you sort of, especially if you stretch it a little, you see the holes, which is cool. The reverse side is also very interesting with these. I like these clear columns of sort of knit stitches there. So
a lot of the reverse sides are interesting. That's a really cool one there.
Yeah, and I think part of the key to this is to get the right yarns in.
Yeah, and the netting is so interesting.
Yeah, that one there I really like too.
Yeah,
so,
that was fun.
Yeah, I said that I was starting a real project, and we put a lot of thought in together to selecting a project, and I ended up choosing the Powder Puff scarf from Nancy Marchant's book. So you can have a quick, it's here.
Oh, okay.
Have a quick look at it here. We'll look at it properly in a minute. And I did want to use the yarns that we already had. And this is what I've ended up with. So we've got a beautiful powdery pink mohair here. And to me, this is a speckledy green and blue. You're saying
it's a baby blue with speckles.
All right.
It's a very girly combination.
It's quite girly. Madeline or Andrea will be wearing this. I won't be competing to wear this one. And I must say, I was a little bit hesitant to actually knit it in the cafe that we go to sometimes. Because it's not quite the same as knitting on a nice blokey hiking jacket or a...
with breed-specific wool that's a bit rough.
Socks. Yeah, a bit rough and a bit toothy. So,
yeah, this really is such a powder pink. It's a Rowan Kid Silk Haze.
Yep.
And this is also really girly.
Yeah, but I've got past that because I just need to get it knitted, and I like sitting in cafes.
Yeah.
So
it is, not that we go to a cafe very often.
No, not nearly enough, but if I do, I have to work while I'm there.
Definitely.
But this yarn, Andrea, tell us the history of it.
Okay, you might remember this yarn because when I knitted this jumper here, which is the Zweig by Caitlin Hunter, I first of all bought this speckled yarn to be the colourwork yarn up here in the yoke. I had this idea that it was going to be just a very subtle, elegant version of the Zweig.
It was very subtle.
It was too subtle. There was no contrast between this and the main body, so I ended up getting the yellow instead. And I normally don't knit with speckles at all, really, because I like to do quite a lot of patterning work, and that means that you don't really show off the speckled, and the speckled takes away from the patterns. So it was great to find a use for them.
Yeah.
But they are such a girly combination, aren't they?
Yeah, but it's good.
It's cool. It is really good. So it'll be between Madeline and I to fight for it.
Probably a bit hard to see from a distance. So here's a close-up of the stitch pattern, and we'll show the reverse side as well. The stitch pattern is number 30 from the book. This hasn't been blocked yet, so it will probably look better once it has been given a good hard blocking. This is my first time knitting with mohair, and I'm actually finding it really easy, and overall it's a very relaxing knit. I really like the contrast between the quite thin mohair yarn and the thicker other yarn.
We're continuing with me in under construction, and very soon you're going to meet Erin from Morehouse Farm. And Erin gave me, and here's a picture of it, this absolutely gorgeous kit, which is Hedgehog mitts. They're super, super cute, and it comes with her yarn. And this is what I've done so far. I thought it would be really great if I could whip these up and before we filmed this episode, and I thought it's only going to take me a couple of nights. I'll easily whip them up in a couple of nights, but I totally underestimated. They are a really fun knit, but the quills on the back of the Hedgehog do take quite some time. So you can see they've got bobbles here, and it really does look like a hedgehog, but they're quite elongated. And what you do for these bobbles is cast on a bunch of stitches and then cast them all off again. And you do that on every second stitch right across the back of the mitt. So that's quite a lot of quills and quite a lot of time. So it is fun. When I was doing it, and I was planning to do these for my 5-year-old niece. And as I was knitting them up, and it was taking me quite a lot more time than I thought it would, my imagination started running, and I thought of these mitts being made and sent across there to Australia and then being played with a couple of times and then being left in a corner. And then my motivation kind of just gradually deflated. And I thought, you know what, this yarn is just so cozy and so beautiful. I really want to make it into something that I know is definitely going to be used a lot and really loved. And it has quite a hand-spun quality to this, or look or feel to this yarn. It's really interesting. So I thought I really need to make it into a hat because I've got just enough yarn for a hat and it would make a really great hat. So before I picked a new hat, I thought we have to look through all of our other hats to see what we've got before I pick a new pattern. So we're going to take a quick detour from under construction from the archives, which we haven't done for a very long time.
Yeah.
Because I want to show you the hats that we've done so far. So this very first one was Andrew's very first project.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It looks, what do you think now? You did a really good job.
Pretty good.
He presented this in episode 1 of Fruity Knitting.
It's
it is
incredible.
pretty good. But you took a long time over it and now I think you'd whip it up.
Yeah.
So that was his first project. Then not too long after that, he did this one, which is a cabled hat. This is a Rowan pattern. It's actually, it's a really smart looking pattern. It's a 2x2 rib, and then every 12th row or so, you've got actually quite a complicated cable.
Yeah, and I can remember those rows.
Still.
Yeah.
They're burnt into your brain.
Totally.
But yeah, so that was his first cable project. And then I think this is your first brioche project. Mm-hmm. This is woolen vine yarn, and it's just a good, simple brioche hat, single colour brioche. You did that really well.
Very squishy.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then you followed that by the same pattern, but 2 colours here, 2 colour brioche. And then this pattern here is the Booster Beanie by Gudrun Johnson, and that was your very first Fair Isle hat and project.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a great hat for Fair Isle if you're new to Fair Isle. This I would say is your favourite hat. You wear it every day.
Yeah. It's either on my head or in my pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And then we'll get on to some hats that I've done. This is my favourite hat that I've knitted. It's a really, really beautiful classic design. It comes from Susan Crawford's Vintage Shetland project book, and it's based on a 1920s cap. And it's done very much in Shetland colours of that time period, and the Shetland traditional patterns of that time period. It's a stunning, stunning hat. It's sort of lined on the brim as well. And this is Jamieson and Smith yarn. So I'd say that's probably my favourite hat. And then last year we interviewed Woolly Wormhead, who is the queen of hat designs. So I thought I really want to try out some of her designs. And this one here is a sideways knitted hat, which is such an amazing construction. So in every row you've got a little bit of the brim, a little bit of the main body, and a little bit of the crown. And I think this is a fantastic hat. It looks really great in hand-dyed yarns, so that was fun. And then the other one of hers that I did was the Camden cap, which is an early design for her, but a super popular one because it's just a classic cap with the brim and the button on top, which is really great. So looking through all of these hat designs, I realised what I'm missing is just a good workhorse hat that's got a double folded up brim that goes around your ears, because when we're hiking and the wind is really chilly, that's where I feel it. And I feel, even though these hats are really gorgeous looking, they don't keep my ears really warm in really cold weather. So I've picked a new hat design. It's this one here. It's Hutchins, and it's a Brooklyn tweed design, and it's cabled. This is what I've done so far. You can see that I've done my brim twice as long as what's written in the pattern, and that's because I want to fold it up like this here. So it's a lovely, cozy, cabled design. I've been working on it for a couple of nights, so I think it's not going to take me very long at all to finish. You can see the gorgeous thick cables there. I have to say, for half the time that I've been working on it, it was all on this darn tubular cast on, which just took so much time. If I do that again, I might see if I can find a less fiddly way, but that took quite a lot of time, I think. I got a bit impatient. So there it is there. And what is particularly interesting about this yarn, and you're going to meet the sheep that provided the fibre for this yarn very soon, is that in the Morehouse Farm's flock is superfine Saxon Merino, and they have chocolate brown sheep, superfine Saxon Merino sheep, which I have never seen before, certainly not in Australia. And what they've done is just carded a little bit of the dark chocolate fleece in with the white fleece, and it's turned out to be this really nice oatmeal natural colour. So I think I'm going to love this hat and enjoy wearing it.
Yep. Coming up now is our interview with Erin from Morehouse Farm, and then we're going to meet Laura and Sven from Northlight Fibers. And then after that, we're going to Maine to meet Elizabeth Smith, who is our guest on Knitters of the World. Both Morehouse Farm and Northlight Fibers are offering Fruity Knitting patrons a discount in their online stores. Morehouse Farm breeds superfine Saxon Merino sheep in the Hudson River Valley, and they're kindly offering Fruity Knitting patrons a 20% discount on everything in their online store. Their yarn comes in many different colours, including variegated and 4 natural undyed shades. They have a large selection of yarn weights from lace to bulky, and there are also lots of kits available. Northlight Fibers are offering our patrons a 15% discount on items in their online store. They have very beautiful yarns, including blends from baby alpaca, bamboo, cashmere, and superfine merino. They have lots of patterns and kits available as well. So thank you very much to both Morehouse Farm and Northlight Fibers for the generous patron discounts.
One of our favourite segments on Fruity Knitting is Meet the Shepherdess, where we tell the story behind small-scale sheep farmers who are producing their own yarns. And often it's breed-specific yarn. And Morehouse Farm, which is this booth here, they breed superfine merinos, and they started their breeding program way back in the late 80s when they first imported 2 champion superfine merino rams from Australia. And Erin here was just a little kid back then. She was mucking about on the farm herself and helping out with the chores. Erin, you've got a really long relationship with the founders of the farm, and you're planning to take over the running of the sheep farm and the company very soon when they retire. So tell us the story of the farm and the sheep, and then show us some of the great yarns that they're producing.
You got it. Well, welcome. And yes, I was a little kid on the farm helping out on weekends because I grew up on a neighboring sheep farm and good friends of the family, our family. So in the early 80s, they bought the farm, which was an escape from New York City life, and decided they needed to run it as a business. So they combined Albrecht's love of sheep with Margaret's love and knitting skills and decided merinos were the way to go because of their fabulous fleeces. But at the time, though, right, natural fibers weren't so popular. It was all synthetics. So merinos were very hard to find in the area. So they drove to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and bought the Champion Merino flock in 1983, and that's where they started breeding these beautiful animals. And then in 1987, in order to up the game, they decided to import those 2 superfine merinos, and that made Morehouse Farm the first superfine merino sheep farm in America.
That's extraordinary. And another thing that they do, which is really unusual, is that they've left the genes, or that they've kept breeding the dark shades of merinos. And you don't get that. I've never seen that in Australia. So you've got some here. Tell us a bit about all of the shades.
Yeah, usually the dark sheep are not wanted because it's very hard to dye over dark yarn. So we take the white from the natural sheep and then also the dark, which is this beautiful chocolate brown. They naturally grow in so many different shades. When we blend them together, it looks like chocolate. And then we have 3 in between that we achieve by blending a little bit of dark in with the white for our oatmeal, our silver, and a brown heather. And they're all gorgeous all by themselves. We also make sure that we minimally process this. So besides shearing and then washing and then carding and spinning, that's all there is to it. There isn't any acid wash. There's no superwash, so it behaves just like wool should. And it's as natural as can be without any damage along the way.
It's really beautiful. Can you say something about the weights that you have and what ply they are?
You bet. So we've got lace here, which is a single ply worsted spun. And then we double that right here gives us our 2-ply, and the name is right after the mill, 2-ply, so it's twice as thick as the lace. Works up as a nice sport weight. Then we have a worsted, which is actually a stranded yarn, so you can't see the twist. It's very loosely spun. And that's our worsted. And then we have our bulky, which is actually 6 strands together, and it is applied yarn, so you can see those twists, and that creates the basis of our palette.
And what about the coloured yarns? Where are they getting dyed?
We work with a small dye house in North Carolina, and we employ the whole neighborhood by helping to give them the business there. And they use natural acid-based dyes, so we can have some pretty fantastic colors. We've got actually 115 between the solids and the variegated, so there's sure to be something for a project that you're looking for.
I've got something super cute in my hands. It's a little hedgehog, and there's a ton of animal designs about. I think they were done by, or originally they were designed by Margaret. So tell us a little bit about these kits.
Yes, she was an amazing knitter who could see something in nature, inspired by it, and then create a kit with just a little bit of shaping. So if you can knit and you can purl, you can make any of these kits. We package them that way so you can pick any color you want and then get the same project with all the bits and pieces like eyes for critters that you need, and all the instructions, of course. And she did an amazing job of an elephant, an alligator, and that's our one other weight of yarn. It's a super densely spun sport weight called gator yarn, and it resists all of the smushing that happens with really lofty yarns. So the bumps on a gator will hold up for years to come.
That's so cool. Okay, now you've also, in your pocket, you've got some Fair Isle. So you're also selling other little kits, aren't you?
Yes, so this is part of the MRI Mackers project, which is to benefit the Shetland Scanner appeal. And we did a knit along this summer to focus on this and teach people Fair Isle, because our goal with the farm is to teach the world to knit. It's good for you, mind, body, and soul. And it's actually been my recovery after a recent wrist surgery. It's been my physical therapy, which, hey, I'm doing that every day.
That's great. Okay, well, thanks so much.
Thank you for coming to visit.
So I'm with Sven and Laura from Northlight Fibers, and they own a micro yarn mill on Block Island where they spin the most beautiful luxury blends with minimal processing. So Sven, can you tell us a bit about your company and the mill?
Thank you so much. So Northlight Fibers is a micro yarn mill, not a mini mill where they often process for other farms. We actually buy fiber, as Laura will talk about, and then spin it and card it and ply it and make it all and dye it. We are located on Block Island in Rhode Island, a small island located 12 miles off the coast in the Atlantic, and we have to bring everything onto the island. So the micro yarn mill is a perfect size. We love Block Island, moved there 12 years ago, and really enjoy working there and spinning and making yarn. We also like working with designers. We work with many designers, from Melanie Berg to Deborah Newton and a host. And recently we've introduced 8 new designs in what we call Beacon. And I want to talk about a couple of them. One of them is by Susanna IC, which is a beautiful shawl in our Forever Lace yarn, which is an alpaca bamboo blend, 80% alpaca and 20% bamboo, that gives it drape as well as strength. And we've also worked with Amanda Schusker, who did a beautiful sweater called Rock Rose in our Atlantic yarn, which is a 100% merino wool yarn.
Yeah, and what's this gorgeous thing?
So Jill Woolcott did an outstanding hat, and it actually comes in 3 sizes, and it's a beautiful 2-color hat for both children as well as adults, and it's an outstanding design. To that point, we have sweaters, we have shawls, we have hats, and really a host of different designs to highlight the yarn.
Now, Laura, you're the spinner and you have all of the technical knowledge. So can you tell us how your 2 favourite yarns or the 2 best sellers and how you've designed them?
So this is our Spring Street line, which is made with 100% Falkland Islands merino. And when we first got that Falkland Islands merino in, I was overwhelmed by how soft and fine and long it was. So it spins in a nice yarn. It's really doesn't pill as much because of the length, so the twist holds all those ends in. And so that's one of my favorites, and it is one of our best sellers. Mm-hmm. And then the other one is our Water Street line, which is a blend of 40% cashmere and 60% merino. And this was quite a challenge to get the way we have it because cashmere is very, very short, and the merino is longer. And so to get the spinning equipment to actually adjust so that it doesn't hold back on the merino and let too much, you get the slubs, and cashmere is very finicky with humidity and static, and so it took a little bit of time. The other thing about this is the way the colors are marled, and I dye all the fiber before I spin it, so everything is dyed
In the fleece, really?
yeah, in the fleece, in a big kettle dye. And then from there, we blend the colors on the carder to get the three, every one of the Water Street skeins and colorways has 3 different colors in it. So you have to look very carefully to pick out, but they're there. So
Now, what about the plies and the yarn weights?
So I personally prefer knitting with a 3-ply yarn because it is rounder and it really gives body, and it helps the stitch definition pop out. So most of my yarn is plied with a 3-ply. The Forever Lace is a little different. That's a 2-ply because it's also good for weavers, and they prefer 2-ply. And so that's...
So mainly 3-ply and 2-ply, and that is a good range for knitters. Now, just one last thing I wanted to talk about is you also do retreats, don't you? So tell us very quickly about the retreats. Sven?
Well, the retreats we have are 2 kinds. One is a design retreat, a knitwear designer retreat with Deborah Newton that is absolutely fantastic. And actually, we have a host of students coming to the show here at Vogue Knitting Live in New York to have a reunion. And they come, it's a 4-night, 5-day retreat, and Deborah takes them from the beginning to the end. In essence, when you see a garment down on a street or in a catalog, how do you design that? How do you bring it back and design something that fits you and fits the style you want? The other retreats we have are 2-day, 3-day retreats with specific teachers. So for example, we have Olga Jazzy and Cecilia Campacciaro coming in May, and Melanie Berg and Sarah Solomon coming in June. Those are great retreats. They are a lot of fun, and it's small, intimate classes, but it's on Block Island. And everybody who has been, we've done this for 10 years, talks about the balance between the island, the inspiration of colors, and the mill. And we're located on a farm, so you have to walk through the alpaca, through the camels, by the yak, to be able to get to the mill.
Well, it just sounds fantastic. And I've seen the pictures of it because, as you all know, we've had Deborah Newton on the show a couple of times before. So it's been really wonderful to meet you in person and hear about your company. So thank you.
Thank you so
for
much.
having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Smith, and I am a knitting designer living in the state of Maine. I've been a knitter for just about 16 years and a knitting designer for 10 years. Even prior to learning how to knit, I've always been the kind of person who loved to make and create things with my hands, whether it was other crafts or even making music. So being a maker has always just been a big part of my life and really what makes me tick. My formal education is in marketing and advertising, and in addition to being a knitting designer and working at a yarn shop, I've also worked in the tech industry for about 10 years now. So my world has always been this combination of expressing creativity through making, but then also being super analytical and tactical and logical. And I've actually found that having both of these sides has helped me tremendously as a designer, as different as they may seem from the outside. My goal in designing is to always find a way to create modern wearable pieces using simple knitting techniques and to write instructions for them that are as clear as possible so that knitters of all skill levels can really enjoy it. My design aesthetic is all about layers. I love layering, and I love finding ways to create these simple and modern knit pieces that would work well for a layering style. One of these layering pieces that I love is my Alanis. This piece is knit in Quince & Company's Owl yarn, which is a worsted weight alpaca and wool blend. I love the texture of this yarn, and the color palette in this yarn is really nice as well. With this piece, I wanted to create a simple silhouette that had lots of interesting yet still simple details to it. So I had things like a split hem that has an I-cord edge to it. I have this cute little pocket that has a contrasting pocket lining in it, and some asymmetrical vertical garter stitch bands on the left side. I also mimicked that garter stitch up here at the top of the shoulders. I love the name of this piece as well. I named it Alanis because when I was trying to come up with name ideas, I often turn to music as inspiration. And with the pocket being such a prominent little detail of the piece, I kept thinking of the song Hand in My Pocket by Alanis Morissette. Great classic 90s song that I loved when I was 16 and I still love today. So I just thought it was such a fitting name for it. This is my scarf piece called Coming Home, and it has become one of my favorites because I wear it all the time. It's become my go-to accessory. It's also a design that I sell kits for on my website. The yarn is called Edna by the indie dyer Dirty Water Dye Works, and she's based in the Boston area, not too far from here in Maine. And I love this colorway. This is the Dijon colorway, and if I could wear it every day all the time, I would. Absolutely love it. The content of the fiber is a Polworth wool as well as silk, so it has really nice stitch definition, but it also has a really nice drape to it. With this piece, I wanted to create something that would be interesting yet still simple to knit. And when I was swatching with it, I loved how this stitch pattern looked. It's a garter ladder stitch, and it's super simple. It's a combination of double yarn overs and just two different types of decreases. And the pattern is only a 2-row repeat. So you find your groove with the pattern, and it becomes a good mindless knitting project, something that you can work on while you're binging Netflix or listening to your favorite podcast. This is my penny vest. And my goal with this design was twofold. First, I wanted to create a piece that would be good for layering, but that could also work in warmer weather as well as in colder weather. The other thing I wanted to accomplish was I wanted to create a piece that could be a good skill transition piece. So if you're a beginner knitter and you've done a bunch of scarves and cowls, but you're not feeling quite confident to take on a sweater, I wanted to create a piece that would be that good transition piece because it is a garment and you learn things like drape and sizing, but the construction is super simple because basically it is a giant rectangle with armholes in it. I also wanted to add a few just small little easy details to it. I have this eyelet stitch pattern that goes all along the fronts of it, and the back of the piece is done in garter stitch. The yarn that I use for this is Knit One Crochets 2 Swa at Lin, which is a DK weight linen blend, and it has some really great tweedy flex to it as well. I love the drape of this, and this kind of garment and this kind of drape is perfect for warmer weather climates. The other goal with this design was that I wanted it to be versatile, that you could wear it with warmer or cooler climates. So I decided to write the instructions for fingering all the way to bulky weight yarn. So it's super versatile and could work with a lot of different yarns that people might have in their stash. My Ramona cardigan is probably one of my most popular patterns. It's knit in Quince & Company's Osprey yarn, which is one of my favorites. It's an Aran weight, 100% wool. It has great stitch definition, is just a super squishy wool. It's knit seamlessly from the top down and has this simple cropped silhouette, which is great for layering. One of my favorite simple stitch patterns is a broken rib, and you'll see it featured in a couple of places in this pattern. It's actually featured in these little raglan lines over here, and then prominently at the wide hem at the bottom. It makes a great first sweater project as well because it is really simple and it's done all in one piece and it's top down. I've loved seeing all the finished photos that I've seen posted over the years of this, and I especially love the ones where people have said this was their first sweater project because I know how intimidating and overwhelming doing your first sweater can seem. So it's super gratifying to know that my design has helped somebody kind of overcome that hurdle in their knitting. Another layering piece that has become a favorite of mine is my capo. It's part capelet, part poncho, and part just little layering tee. It's knit up in Barocco Yarns Katina, which is a bulky weight that has this really cool chainette construction, which just makes it super light and airy. The construction is so simple. It's knit seamlessly, all in one piece, starting at the bottom. You bind off stitches for the armholes and cast them back on. Then you work some decreases up to the top and bind off. So it's a super simple, straightforward piece and actually would also make a great first garment for a more beginner knitter. You can also make the length a little bit longer. I've seen some great pictures of people who have altered this a little bit to make it more of a tunic, and it looks really cute. Well, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about me and my designs and my design process.
Definitely bonus points to Elizabeth for the extreme knitting on the water there. Andrea, I don't know that we've actually knitted in a boat, certainly not a small boat like that.
Now that looked like a dinghy, like a motorised dinghy.
Yeah, that was great. In case you're wondering, Elizabeth was on the Casco Bay, which is off the Gulf of Maine on the Portland, Maine shoreline. So that was really stunning. Big thank you to Elizabeth for your contribution. I think Elizabeth's designs really fit a niche, just like she said and described. Great skill transition pieces, really stylish, but very well suited to less experienced knitters who may never have knitted a garment before. And even if you are more experienced knitter, then it's a great chance to show off a nice yarn with those simple shapes.
Yeah, definitely. As you know, our daughter Madeline knits, and she's actually introduced her two best friends into knitting. And so occasionally she'll WhatsApp me and say, Mum, can you suggest a really good scarf pattern, just a basic scarf pattern or a hat pattern? And I think Elizabeth designs are great for that because they're really stylish. They're things that Madeline and her friends would definitely want to wear for sure. But they're simple. They're really simple.
Yeah.
And I think that coming home scarf would be great.
Yeah, yeah.
Because all you need for that is just a really beautiful yarn, and the stitch pattern looks pretty easy to do, and then you've got a big chunk of it and you've got a gorgeous garment.
It looks impressive. It's good value for your effort and skill.
Yeah. And I first saw Elizabeth's work through the Ramona cardigan, which is that really cute, classic cropped cardigan that comes in two weights. There's the Aran weight and I think it's sports weight or worsted weight. I'm not sure what she said. Yep. But they're really great little designs.
I like the red one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the finer yarn one.
Yeah. So, I think Elizabeth's got a lot of talent and I hope you enjoyed getting to meet her here.
Now, patrons, if you would like to try out her patterns, Elizabeth is offering you a 25% discount of all her self-published patterns. Elizabeth has a great selection of garments and accessories and even some kids' garments. So enjoy looking through her collection and thank you very much to Elizabeth. We're back onto me with a quick update of my Irish moss, which is an Alice Darmore design here. This is for Andrew. Whoopsie, I've got needles poking here and there. So the back and the front are finished. There's the front, you can see the neck, and there's the back there, and it's been sewn up at the side seams, you can see there. That's nice V shaping for Andrew. That's the shape of him.
Yep.
That's your narrow hips and broad shoulders.
Broad shoulders, yeah.
So this is great. And he's tried it on and it fits him, which is always a relief. So that's great. In fact, he looked so good in it and it looked really great just as a vest. So I thought maybe there is a possibility that we could just keep it as a vest. I could do some ribbing around the neck, put in saddle shoulders just there, and some ribbing around the armholes. I think you need another vest. You've only got the one you're wearing.
Dolls, you do recall that we have a deal, and it was a sweater, which I unexpected. So if you don't want it to be done for breach of contract, we're looking at sleeves still. Thank you very much.
And I have to finish the second part of the tutorial, don't I? So sleeves it is. Actually, I started on a sleeve and then I had to rip a whole lot back because it was a little bit too narrow. So maybe that's why I'm trying to get out of it. So we have to hurry up and get that done. So that's the update of this project. And this yarn is, as I've told you before, is from Millpost Merino Farm, which is a sheep farm outside of Canberra in Australia. And they farm superfine Saxon Merino sheep. And their farm we featured in episode 86 in Meet the Shepherdess, but they aren't shepherdesses, they're shepherds. Here's a picture of them. This is Harry and Murray. They were a real scream. They're very funny. And if you haven't seen that episode, you probably really enjoy going and watching it because it's a great story behind their farm. Now, what's really interesting is that we've actually featured in this episode 3 farms that are breeding superfine Saxon Merino sheep. So there's Millpost Merino, which is a farm outside of Canberra. They've been perfecting their flock for decades now. And then there's Morehouse Farm that you've just seen. That's in the Hudson Valley. And they've got the chocolate brown merinos, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
And then in our interview with Clara Parkes, her 676-pound bale of fleece came from a flock of superfine merinos. So superfine Saxon merinos.
Yep.
So that's pretty amazing coincidence.
It is amazing, particularly since 2 of them are in the US.
Yeah.
In Australia,
There's merinos everywhere.
Lots.
But even Saxon merinos, there's a lot of merino, like they say, is just a brand. There's a lot of different types, but the Saxons have got the finest of the fine fleece. Yeah. So this is my project for the Patron only knit along, which is held in the Patron Community Forum. And that knit along has come to a close. There's a lot of beautiful designs there, and some of them have been finished and some of them are still going, and they're still gorgeous and we want to see them. So we'll keep those threads open for you. But the knit along has come to a close and we have 2 fantastic prizes for you. Clara Parkes, publisher, Abrams Press, has donated 2 copies of Vanishing Fleece. So that's super exciting. We're very excited to have that. And it is very tricky just to pick winners all the time because every project has got a lot of love and attention to detail and care, and they're all beautiful and they're all different in many different ways. So but we have to pick 2, and here we go. We've got 2. One of the prizes goes to Jocelyn S., who knitted the Petals and Pearls sweater by Anne Hansen. There's a lot of intricate cabling and lace in this pattern, and when Jocelyn had finished the sweater, she saw that the sleeves were too long. So with some encouragement from fellow knit-along participants, she did some surgery to make them fit properly, which is an amazing effort in itself, and the result looks really perfect now. So congratulations, Jocelyn. The other prize goes to Jenny V, who knitted Navelli by Caitlin Hunter, but she gave it long sleeves and she made it less of a cropped top. And I think the result looks really beautiful. I really like the slightly blousy sleeves and the colour combination looks really striking. So well done, Jenny.
congratulations to our 2 winners, and thank you to everyone who joined in the cowl with encouragement and advice. I think that's really what it's all about. So thanks to you.
Definitely, yeah. And if you are watching this show, please do become a patron. It's only possible to produce this show through the financial support of our patrons. And it is both Andrew and my full-time job. And when we say full-time job, that means we are actually working on it literally 7 days a week. And that's not just sitting on the couch knitting. Our sitting on the couch knitting only happens usually about 9 o'clock at night time. It is our goal this year to cut it down to 6 days a week working on the show so it feels more sustainable. So if you are watching, please do contribute to the production of the show. And thank you to the wonderful patrons who are doing exactly that. We really appreciate you.
Yep. Coming up now is our interview with Clara Parkes. She's got a really interesting story to tell, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us today. We really love having your company, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Bye.
Bye.
Welcome to Fruity Knitting. It's the 10th anniversary of Vogue Knitting Live here in New York, and knitters have come from all around the world for the 3-day festival. And it's a fantastic festival to meet in person all the well-known names in the industry. And we're really excited to have the opportunity to meet and interview the well-known knitting author, speaker and wool advocate, Clara Parkes. And Clara has written 7 books. And her most recent book, Vanishing Fleece, was published in October last year. And we are going to concentrate on the story behind this book in this interview. So, Clara, we are so thrilled to have you on Fruity Knitting. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. This is fun. I've been looking forward to it.
Okay, so you are a big name in the knitting world, and you've been... educating knitters for nearly 2 decades now. Yeah. And so lots of people know your work, but just for the viewers who may only know you by name, can we start with a brief background on your career leading up to The Vanishing Fleece?
So my career, basically, to explain it, you know how when you run into most people and they're like, I love your sweater, what's the pattern? I'm always, what yarn did you use? So 20 years ago, when the internet was beginning, you were starting to be able to buy stuff online, but the descriptions weren't really clear what they were. And so I suddenly realized there was an opportunity where I could step in and be the eyes and the hands and the nose for knitters. I could swatch the yarns for them. So in 2000, I launched Knitters Review. And at that point, it was a weekly email newsletter and companion website. And just over 20 years, I've been swatching, like I put all the yarn through the paces. So does it have, knots in the yarn? Does it have weird stuff that falls out? Is it irregular? Does it bleed? Does it fade? And then I thrash it to see how well it survives wear and tear to help you understand when you're buying something sight unseen, what's the story behind it? So I started with the mechanics of yarn, and then over time, I became more interested in the stories behind it. So I started in 2006. I was approached by an editor at Random House. They were starting a new imprint called Pottercraft, and they asked if I would like to write a book, and I said, yes, please. And they said, what would you like to write? And I told them I'd like to write a book about yarn. So I got to write the Knitter's Book of Yarn, which was everything I'd learned up until then. And from there, I went into the Knitter's Book of Wool to tell the story specifically about wool. And then I went into socks. And then it started getting more into the storytelling. As more people got familiar with yarn and more able to kind of analyze it for themselves, I felt like it was okay to let people go shopping themselves. I've given them the tools. now we can go more into the stories of the people and the animals and the infrastructure behind
And personal
what brings you-
experiences of it.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's so much storytelling in the yarn world. There's so much potential for storytelling.
Okay, well, the central character of this book here, Vanishing Fleece, is the bale of fleece, and you've called it the Great White Bale, and I think
Yes.
that's a reference to Moby Dick.
Yes, even though I still haven't read it. Shh. I confess that. Okay, we're good. We're good.
But you know the basic story, and that's
Yes.
good enough.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it felt as epic as
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So introduce us to the Great White Bale. What was the main aim or mission for the project, and how did you get the whole thing financed?
So the mission of it, I was about 12 or 13 years in, and I was starting to feel kind of jaded, or, you know, sort of like, I could tell you how this is going to knit up. Like
Nothing's new.
Nothing's new. And I started to worry. In my jadedness, I was losing my curiosity. And then also that I was becoming one of those restaurant critics who had never actually worked in a kitchen. So I thought, like, well, I can't go back to school necessarily, and there's no degree program that's really specifically what I'm interested in terms of yarn and wool and how wool becomes yarn, that would help me better understand what people go through when they try to make a skein, so that when I'm criticizing it, I can know just how deep of a cut I'm making in that person's heart, like how hard they fought for something. So, so this 676-pound bale of scoured, superfine Saxon merino came into my life, and I realized that could be my opportunity. Yeah. Like, I'd already learned how to spin yarn by hand, but that's not a mill.
Yeah.
And the mills require hundreds of pounds of fiber to get in there. So I thought, aha, I could divide this bale up and use it as a teaching opportunity and send it, I decided, on 4 mills, and just walk through the steps, go to the mill, meet the people, not as a reviewer or a critic, but as a customer. Bales of wool do not come cheap. I know some people, they've said, oh, how nice it was that you were given a bale of wool. It was not given to me. But I thought, what would keep me accountable also is if I brought other people along with me. So until that point, Knitter's Review was funded by advertising, but I thought this could be a little bit more interesting if people really committed to the journey with me. So I created kind of a crowdfunding. It wasn't Kickstarter, it wasn't Patreon, it was just me. And I opened up 2 different opportunities for people to join. They could either be on the bus with me, we called that the armchair traveler.
Yeah.
And you can follow all along with the stories and the videos. And if you join by a certain time, you still got a bag and a little sample of the bale. And then a fewer people, because even though 676 pounds of fiber sounds like a lot, it's not a ton. So fewer people, they could be explorers, and they would actually receive every single skein along the way. So they had like the scratch and sniff version of the adventure. And I was very afraid to do this. And I thought, well, my safety was if nobody signs up or if not enough people sign up, phew, I don't have to do it, right? But unfortunately, everybody signed up.
Within a couple of hours.
Within a couple of hours, all the explorer spots were full, and there were hundreds of armchair travelers. But what made it easier was I promised everybody that I would be absolutely honest and transparent. So even if I messed up, like, there wasn't pressure to be perfect, because that wasn't the point.
That's
point
a really
was
smart
learning.
move.
Yeah. And I didn't even know, people would email me like, so what are the yarns going to be? I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Each step is going to inform the next. And it worked out beautifully.
Yeah.
It was quite an adventure.
Okay, now you bought the bale of wool from a farmer called Eugene Wyatt, and he seems to have been a really interesting personality and special to you. So
he was.
Could you tell the audience a little bit about Eugene? Why, in your opinion, do you think he was unique or special? And then introduce us to his flock and their fleece.
Eugene Wyatt. So I say in the book that he he approached me at the New York Sheep and Wool Festival at Rhinebeck, and he was tall and distinguished, and he wore this rugged barn jacket, and he had these eyes the color of a Swiss lake, and he came up and
Looked like Robert Redford.
He
I
looked
think.
like Robert Redford's older brother, who actually worked on a farm. And he said, nobody can resist these words. He said, my name is Eugene Wyatt, and I have the largest flock of purebred Saxon Merino sheep in the United States. And for me, that was like, a very rare thing. You're always looking for an interesting source for something. Mm-hmm. So we became friends, and the more I got to know him, the more I realized this is a really interesting person. He grew up in San Francisco in the 1960s, and he worked in an art gallery, and then he managed an art gallery, and then he went to Paris, and then he moved to New York and married his sweetheart, who was a fashion designer.
So not a typical story of a farmer.
No, but it turns out actually his uncle or his great uncle was a sheep farmer out in Colorado, which he only told me much later. But sheep came into their life because she did very well as a designer. So they bought a farm outside of New York, but they needed something on the land. And so he thought cows, because they're big and bold and they've got horns and they're very
masculine.
Yeah, they're very masculine. And she wisely said, that's a little scary. Could we do sheep? And so that's when he first saw a merino sheep, he claims, and he fell in love with the majestic horns. So they brought a few sheep home just as lawnmowers. Once the lambs arrived, he was hooked.
Yeah.
And how he worked in the world is whatever he became interested in, he absolutely immersed himself in it. And so with sheep, he read every book that he could from every person. He hired the best people.
And learned from them.
That's exactly it. It wasn't where you hire people and then disagree with them and tell them what they should do. But he always said, you hire the best and you learn from them. So, then I realized later, he wanted to learn more about yarn.
Yeah.
So then I came into his life.
And also with the sheep breed, tell us a bit about that, because he followed the Australian standards. So he found out what was good and followed that and didn't, went outside the box a bit.
Yeah, well, that's pure Eugene. So as he read about it, he learned, what is the gold standard? That's what he was really interested in. And Saxon Merino, it's the gold standard for merino wool. It's the most prized, precious variant. And so the first year when he showed his sheep, and I think this was even before he started really importing, right at the very beginning when you could bring sheep into the United States, he won, but they warned him his sheep would have to be bigger to show in the United States. He called it's the culture of the carny, is what he said. They've got the big Ferris wheel right outside the showground. He said, no, I don't want that. He wanted the smaller frame, which came with much, much finer fleece. Yeah. And so he just cut from the industry, and for 30 years, just relentlessly bred to that standard, to the original Australian Saxon Merino standard.
So your bale was really premium. Yeah. Very lucky you.
It was. He did not, even when Ralph Lauren was looking for wool for the Olympic uniforms, I remember him telling me, they wrote to me, but I gave him a ridiculous quote because he didn't want his wool going to the man, into the big commercial machine. He really cared where it went.
The topic of scale pops up repeatedly in this book, and just for an example, the bale, like you said, was, I think in kilograms it's 300, in pounds it's 676. Mm-hmm. And to give the viewers a perspective of how much, what that is, that's enough fleece to make 650 sweaters or around 1,500 pairs of socks. So the scale of the size of
it's about the size of this couch.
Was intimidating for you.
It was.
But at times it seems that in comparison, your major challenge was that you were too small a player in the wool game. Mm-hmm. And so could you just talk about your experience of the contradictions of scale within the wool industry?
It's a very, very tricky thing. 1,000 is the number in the U.S., and since we go by pounds, it would be 1,000 pounds. The minimum to work with a commercial scouring plant, of which we only have 2 left, is 1,000 pounds. And part of that is business, but it's also that's what the machine needs to be able to push the fiber through. So my bale was one of several that went through. So there's that. And then on the other side, if you're trying to make knitting yarn, like small batch knitting yarn, you're talking 100, 200 pounds. So if you want to scour with the big people, that's like 50 cents a pound. And then there's this giant empty area, and then $5 a pound. And there's no middle range.
Yeah.
So I was really stuck between two worlds of, will I have enough? Will I have enough? And, oh, this is so much. What am I going to do with it?
Especially when you opened it up, because it's tightly packed, and then when you've got a great description of cutting the ropes and sort of thinking the whole thing's going to explode.
They can explode if you don't. I got some very good advice, so nobody was injured. I didn't have to get an insurance policy. But yeah, it's under such pressure that if you're not careful, you keep the plastic. If you're opening a bale, here's your advice: keep the plastic on, cut through the plastic.
Yeah.
Although then what happens is you've cut through the plastic and it still hasn't exploded. So then you still have to control the explosion by like slashing a certain area so that it kind of explodes that way versus sproing, which would not be a good thing.
Yeah. And to the other extreme is also when you're working with the dyers, they were operating in a very small scale, aren't they? And so it was a real total experience for you of a lot of contradictions.
It really was, from the very small hand dyers where what I was sending them was a lot, to the big dye house where I was using their smallest tank. And there's no in between. It's just a really, I hope that we will occupy that space at some point. But for right now, that was the challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now, as you said, you've been doing the Knitters Review since 2000.
Yeah!
And you're the author of the Knitter's Book of Yarn and the Knitter's Book of Wool. And so you personally just brought a ton of amazing yarn making expertise into the project. So you had a lot of knowledge that you yourself were bringing into the project. But it seems to me that the emphasis was more about using your bale of wool just to get access into and to gain first-hand experience and knowledge from all the different parts of the wool processing industry in America. And the project was less about taking that particular fleece and making the very best possible yarn you could with that particular fleece.
Yeah.
And so I imagine that you would have had quite a few conflicting desires throughout the whole process and some compromises that you'd have to make. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
For me, it wasn't about making the perfect yarn. It was about learning everything that goes into just making yarn, and not just the equipment, but like the places where there are delays, the places where there are problems. So right away I learned that different mills are calibrated differently, and there's only so much they can do. So like with the first mill, I knew that they were used to longer fibers, and my fibers were very short and delicate. And so I sacrificed, this is from lot 1, he warned me it would be neppy, and I love this yarn. It ended up being like oatmeal. And this is another example of being absolutely honest as we went along, because most people were expecting the super soft, luscious, perfect. I knew it was going to do this, and I wanted to really go into why. And so that's how it ended up being with all the mills.
Yeah.
There were delays. It was supposed to be 6 months. It ended up being a year. Because by pushing, I would miss certain things that otherwise I wouldn't get to see. The one mill where she likes to let everything rest overnight between all the steps. So it wasn't just blasting through in one day. It took 4 days to get through. But
she did that so that the yarn could relax into that step.
Yeah, it was for very good reasons. It was Ann Bosch of Blackberry Ridge Woolen Mill, utter perfectionist, and yeah, ideally you would let wool fibers rest between every single step so they can just kind of relax and settle into where they are. Because if you don't do that, I've learned, if you spin it all too fast, you're going to have potential for just this wonky, kind of out of control irregularity where weird things happen because the wool was pushed too fast. It's like pushing bread dough too fast, not letting it rest between steps.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of learning of things like that. It was a lot of Elsa Hollowell, who's one of my wool mentors. She said it's a lot of being very persistent, and then just letting the river flow at whatever speed it's going to flow.
Yeah. So in some cases, the fact that the mill couldn't change the equipment to be exactly right, again, was that because you were too small a player? They just didn't want it. They only had a small slot. We could say, okay, we'll take you now, but we're not going to spend the hours needed to change all of our machinery? Or
No, well,
was it a bit that?
It was, with these guys, it was even more, like, they're willing to change the gears, literally change gears, these cool big cog kind of things that go at the end of the machines in terms of the number of rotations and the amount of pull. This is in the cards, which begin everything. And you can't, they all have a clearance, which is the distance between each roller that's covered with these fine metal teeth. If you're working with longer fibers, there's a greater distance. And we're talking microscopic distances. But their cards were calibrated for longer, kind of the fibers that grow in Maine, which is more like British breeds, like Romney. And this was Eugene's fiber. We're talking 17, 18 microns and about 2 inches. It was shorter. It was more delicate. So if you can't adjust the clearance. It would be, they'd have to take the mill out of commission for weeks.
Okay, yeah.
But it was cool to see, okay, well, what happens? What'll happen? Let's do it. Let's try. What happens?
Yeah.
And I knew it would be kind of lumpy like this, but it's a very intentional nappiness. And so I love it. It's like an old bathrobe, kind of a squishy, lumpy, unexpected, really.
And this is your first batch of yarn, which was spun at the Bartlett Mill.
Yeah.
And that has the last spinning mule in production, commercial production in the US. And spinning mules are really romantic pieces of machinery. And so I thought, could you just describe to the viewers just a basic description of what they look like, how they work, and tell us why you were so enchanted with them?
They're so beautiful. So the spinning mule, we're talking like the beginning of industrialization. So it was the first form of mechanized spinning that mimicked what we were doing with a walking wheel, where you would start the twist and move the fibers back as the twist is being applied, and then you stop and you would wind it back onto the wheel. And that is what this does, but with hundreds of spindles on this beautiful, it looks like a Singer featherweight sewing machine. So you have this hundreds of bobbins, and as they pull back, and then you have these fibers, the yarn, and they're bouncing midair.
Singing.
They're singing. It's like watching a woolly harp, watching the strings kind of vibrate. And it's so beautiful and mesmerizing. It just goes back and forth and back and forth on these tracks on a floor. And of course, at the Bartlett Mill, it's a very old mill. And so it's these creaky wood floors. It's so romantic and it's beautiful. It's mesmerizing.
Yeah.
But it became obsolete because of the time required to move back to the beginning. You were only spinning yarn half the time.
Yeah.
So it became obsolete, but it spins a really neat yarn that's as close to handspun as we can get.
Yeah,
It's airiness.
that's a good description, handspun.
Yeah.
Okay, now dyeing was also a big part of the process, and you selected 3 dyers, each with very different methods or approaches to dyeing.
Yeah.
And one of them had a method, and I think it's with this yarn, of massaging the colour into the yarn, and it totally transformed this, didn't it? Because it was loosely spun and 2-ply yarn that you were slightly disappointed with, if that's too strong a word.
No,
Okay, but you watched that whole experience and you thought it was quite fascinating the way she worked. And again, it's a really small scale operation. So tell us a bit about that.
So it was part of the project. The first skein that they got was natural, because that's where we begin. And then the second step was, all right, let's add the beginning of color. So it was Christine Vehar at A Verb for Keeping Warm did natural dye. And then the third one, you can't talk about yarn in the knitting world without acknowledging natural or hand dyers. So my goal, and this is again about sacrifices, my original goal was to create a combed, worsted spun, multiple ply yarn with a little bit of silk, just like what all the hand dyers are using. But not all fibers will do the same thing.
Yeah.
So when we ran my fibers through that equipment, and applied the twist. And there were only so many times that I could say, "Could you try it again? Could you try it again?" And every time, like, we only had so much fiber too.
Yeah, yeah.
So what I got was loose and wispy, and if I had to review this, I would not have said very good things. But my friend,
Were you scared about what your the travelers would have thought?
Yeah. I was like, okay, I'm going to have to be honest, and I felt like I had failed them because I hadn't fought hard enough for the yarn that we wanted, when really it was like, no, we've just learned something else. Mm-hmm. So my friend Jennifer Heverly, who had Spirit Trail Fiberworks at the time, that I asked her partly because I didn't want someone to ruin the wool, because people were expecting it, and because she's a friend. But what I discovered is she doesn't just dunk it into a kettle. She lays the fiber out on a table and pours the fiber onto the yarn, and then she works like a Swedish masseuse, just like pushing it into the fiber. It's the craziest thing. Jars and jars of dye, and then you lift it up and there's nothing on the table. It's absorbed it all.
And it's so time consuming.
So time consuming and so physically exhausting.
This is it here.
However, what that did is it fixed this yarn. It fixed the looseness. It sort of semi-folded it.
Yeah.
And so what you have is a yarn that's more like velvet.
That's
than
true.
This loose, wispy kind of...
Yeah.
It just made it beautifully cohesive. So I couldn't lie and pretend like that was my intention the whole time, but it was a wonderful coincidence, and we learned something.
Yeah. Okay. So the Great White Bale project then led on to Clara Yarns, and that's where you connected with a series of individual farmers and mill owners and dyers, and just to design and create different farm-to-skein yarns. And again, Clara's, I think, aim was to just educate knitters, because you took them along the ride of the adventure, and you described every single process of it. So can you just tell us briefly a couple of stories behind a couple of the Clara yarns?
So the true story of how Clara Yarn started was, as I went through the bale adventure, people popped out of the woodwork saying, "I didn't know you were making yarn, because I have some fiber you might be interested in." And there was a little bit of money left over from the bale, and so I, like a newly flush wool oligarch, I just snapped it up. And so...
And it's fun.
It's fun! So Clara Yarn began because I wanted to take this knowledge and use it. So one of them was this extraordinary flock of Shetland sheep in the UK. And she had sorted it, all the different colors, and it was so much went into this. And even then I learned about international shipping the hard way. But made a beautiful Shetland wool at Harrisville, which is a historic spinning mill in New Hampshire. And then another one, Elsa Hollowell, my wool mentor, she had extra cormo that she couldn't buy, but if she didn't buy it, she couldn't get the whole clip.
Okay.
And so it was to help her out. Darn! So I got some amazing cormo, and
And was that another bale, a full bale of that, or?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, and it was, but it's never been my intent to like create a whole line of yarns and have it forever. It's
they were all limited editions, weren't they?
All limited editions, just kind of like a dim sum cart to get knitters familiar with different textures and to help them appreciate it, so that they're not daunted when they go to a store and they immediately dismiss something, because there's a whole world there that's really, really interesting.
And you were shining the light on breed-specific yarns too. I think you were the first one to really do that, weren't you? To say, okay, why don't you just get the character and the feeling of this breed and appreciate it, and then
Yeah, and it matters, and it makes your fingers more intelligent. And it really matters in terms of helping any smaller farmer. And they're trying to find a market, and knitters are voracious, and so it just seemed logical to me to connect the two and try to raise the water and lift all the boats in the harbor, like seeding the market and then letting it flourish.
And the other advantage is if it's a limited edition and you get bored with it, then you can move on to the next breed-specific yarn and different type of dyeing and different mill approach. Yeah,
It allows
great.
curiosity, just relentless curiosity, which I find really fun. So.
Okay, now the next question is a really general one, and it's how do you what should we do to revive the wool industry in countries like America, Canada, and Australia? The UK is doing much better, I think, because of the Campaign for Wool by Prince Charles. Yeah. Now, this question you could spend a whole interview on, so I just want you to articulate maybe one point to help that the viewers can take away with them and think about.
I think the one point right now, what I'm seeing, which is really acute, is consumers are being told there's kind of a collision point of the plant-based diets and animal rights. And PETA has been very successful at getting attention, and they do it through paying people to produce videos of lambs being hurt. Yeah. And then saying that wool is cruel. And so the greatest thing that we can do is educate yourself through third-party information that doesn't come from people who have an
agenda.
Yeah. That sheep need to be shorn. And it is an act of kindness. It would actually be an act of cruelty
if they weren't.
Not to shear them. Yeah. And that the more we shear them, the longer, more healthy and productive life they can have. And they can graze on non-arable land and convert resources that would not be used into, they turn it into wool, and they can feed the soil. They can add to the biome. They capture carbon in their wool. Like, there are a lot of reasons that keeping that relationship with sheep that we've had for 10,000 years, keeping that alive, it's good.
It's good for a lot of a lot of different categories.
So check the label and just educate yourself and get comfortable saying, well, actually, I heard that they need to be shorn and that not shearing them is bad, and that also plastics, they're great to recycle what we have, but replacing wool with synthetics doesn't solve the problem. In fact, it contributes to the problem. So check your labels.
When you hear now that there's particles of plastic in rain everywhere, that's a serious problem that we can actually do something about, very literally. Yeah. And it's quite amazing when I see old movies, from before 1945, and you just look at what they're wearing. They're wearing all these natural things. They're wearing cotton, leather, and wool. Yep. That's what everything is made of, and it's all biodegradable. Yeah. It's extraordinary, and you see what we wear now. It's
So we wear it 4 times and throw it away, right? Yeah. It's but we can right the ship. We can just educate yourself and check the labels and.
And most farmers love their animals.
Oh, the animals get better treatment than humans do. Yeah. And there are all sorts of animal welfare standards that are now in effect. ZQ Merino, they are dealing with all the major retailers, and they've got these incredible standards for the animal welfare, for the stewardship of the land, for just it's not something to just dismiss. It's like saying the air is polluted, so we need to stop the air. Yeah. No, let's fix it.
Yeah,
so,
totally. Great answer. Okay, so we're nearly finished, and I've just got one more silly question for Clara. It's the desert island question. It's the terrible desert island question. Yeah. So. This is it. You've got anyone who reads your works knows that you've got a very easy writing style, and you're obviously very passionate about writing, just as you're passionate about wool and yarn and knitting. Mm-hmm. So if you were on a desert island and you could either take the old-fashioned pen and paper or yarn and needles.
Oh, you're mean!
Okay. What would you choose? And really the underlying question of what I'm asking you is both, you're passionate about both, but what's got that sacred little part in your heart? What is got that extra little bit of passion?
I would Oh, haha. I would take the pen and paper.
You're going to do a clever answer for
Yes.
me.
First of all, because if I ran out of, well, I don't have any yarn, so I can cut the paper into strips and roll it and then use the pen. I could knit, but really also so that I could write about wool and write about the experience of knitting and feel it that way. So it's like a twofer. I could get a bang for my buck. I think that's what I would do.
Yes. Okay, well, it's been fantastic to have you on Fruity Knitting, so thanks so much for sharing your time.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Good. Let's say goodbye to the audience.
Bye. Thank you.